All right, so good evening, everyone. Welcome to week 7, day 2 class, learning C sharp, beginners for the beginners. So, in our last class, we were able to talk about EF Core, ASP.NET, and the REST APIs, creating APIs for consumption by the front end, Flutter, mobile devices, or even other servers. Server can communicate with server. So we did a lot of that in our previous class. And I said today would be basically practical, more like setting up everything from creating your classes to creating your controllers, creating your ASP.NET framework, then connecting it to your DB and making calls to your DB and we'll be using Swagger to test everything out today. So I just hope we'll try to finish up everything within the stipulated time. Okay. So we're gonna get started right away. So first off, I would open my Visual Studio and create a fresh project, which is this, create a new project. So I'm going to create a new project. So before now, I remember when I said when you are starting your journey in C sharp, right? It's always good to test things out using console app. Console app is just basically communicating with your command line application, with your command line, trying to see the output of some implementation or some logic you did. So console app helps you to get used to the C sharp syntax. Now we are talking about creating API. So for you to create APIs, you can actually use the console app to do that. There are some platforms that helps you um, make use of that, or there are some project types, and one of the project types is actually the ASP.NET, right? ASP.NET Core. So that is what we use to create our APIs today. Okay. So we just go over it and check for, hope I can still be heard. Hello,
Yes,
can
we
you
can
hear me?
hear you.
All
Yes.
right. So ASP.NET Core Web API. So this is what we'll be using. So it's a project template for creating RESTful APIs and all where you have your controllers, minimum APIs and the rest. So this is what we will use to create our APIs, right? So I'm going to choose this particular one. Then this is a fresh project. This is a fresh solution. So what we'll be dealing with now as a case study will be more of creating a school management um, system, school management software, right? So because I want to create a school management software, I have to give it a name that is in line with the problem I'm trying to solve or the application I'm trying to build. So I call my project name, I just call it school management, school management, um, let's say school management software. Yeah, let me just call it school management software. Then solution name, school management software, right? There are different ways to um, creating standard, or let's say the perfect or best practices when creating your project and all. There are two ways to it. I'll show you guys the first way. Then in our next class, I'll show you the best way to handling it, right? So this is how we handle it the normal way, where you just, as a beginner, you just come up and you want to create your APIs as a ASAP. So you just create your project name, then your solution name and all. Let me accept. Bakari, what's the difference between solution and project?
Um, um, okay, what I know is that we can have we can have as many projects under
Okay.
as we can have many projects rather under one solution.
Okay,
Uh,
okay. All right. All right. That's fine. You got it. That's okay. So that's it. So I go ahead to create next, and then I choose the framework I want to use. So I go for .NET 8.0, .NET 8.0. Then just leave this for now. Okay. When you create the whole stuff.
Boss, I can't see this ASP.NET Core API on my Visual Studio.
Sorry?
Said I can't see this ASP.NET Core on my Visual Studio.
Seriously? Why didn't
Yes,
you
I mean
reach
what
out
I'm
to
seeing
me?
is view. What I'm seeing is view.
Wait, are you using which is it VS Code you are using or Visual Studio?
Vid- Is this on VS Code? It's Visual
This
Studio
is
I'm using
Visual
now.
Studio.
It's my Visual Studio I'm using.
Really?
What I'm seeing is React and ASP.NET, React and ASP.NET Core, Vue and ASP.NET
Ayana,
Core.
we'll connect. Maybe will you still be awake after the class?
I should be because I already slept this evening.
Okay, now we'll connect after class now so that we check it out.
Okay.
All right. So this is what we see when we create the ESP.NET um, project. So if you come over here to my Solution Explorer, you see all the files that has been set up for us, where you have your solution and you have your project. Under the project, you have the connected services, dependencies, properties, controllers, app settings, JSON, program.cs, your HTTP, and weather forecast. So this is more like a boiler template. Whenever you create your ASP.NET Core, right, it comes up with these files. It has been created for you, right? So after creating this, if you want to run your project to see how it works, you can just come over here and run them. I'll explain them. So let's see how it works. Just get to feel it before you start working. Let's see how it displays. So Swagger comes with ASP.NET Core, right? You run it, it also comes with it. So the Swagger is more like a tool for testing your APIs that have been created by you. So over here you see the name of your solution and also the routes and then the name of the API that was created for you, which is what we have here. This is what we have here. Okay. Then the endpoints, when I made mention of they are the REST methods, they get, they put, they delete and the post, right? But what has been done here is just the get method. Everything has been done here for the get method. So whatever APIs you create, whenever you run your code, Swagger get automatically gets the APIs you have created and it will display here for you. Okay. Let's go back to the code. I'm going to stop the recording. So first thing first, your first go to when you create your project is basically your program.cs. I'm going to explain this. This is your program.cs. So try and pay attention. So the first one is the create builder, right? Create builder. So before we can do anything, right? Before we do anything in ESP.NET Core, right? We need a builder. Okay. Um, you can think of a builder like a blueprint, right? Think of it like a blueprint. So we use it to tell the app that whenever you run the program, we would need you to set up what needs to be set up, right? So it's more like telling the app what it needs before it starts, right? The args are just any extra instructions that is passed from the terminal when launching the app, right? Are those extra commands you pass in the terminal when launching the app, but we don't basically use that. So you don't need to pay more attention or worry about these args parameter here. But just know that it's there by convention. Whenever you run it or whenever you create ASP.NET Core, you will always see this. But you don't need to worry yourself about this. Okay. All right. The next one is add services to containers. So services are features or tools. You can see them as tools that the app will need to work, right? They are tools or features which this application will use to work. So because we need those features, we need to register them here so that any part of the app can use them when needed, right? Any part of the app can use them when needed. So take for an example, you want to build Facebook application, and for you to build Facebook application, there are services that Facebook application needs, which can be authentication, where a user logs in, or ability to um upload pictures, right? All those are features. So for you to use those features in your application, you need to register such kind of features in your app. And what helps us to do that is this builder.services.add. So what this add means, what kind of services are you actually adding to the application, right? All the services that you need to add to the application, you need to add them here. If you don't add a particular service, whenever you run the application and you are trying to use a particular service that you have not added, your application is going to break because you didn't add that service you needed for the application. Okay? Any question? Thumbs up before I proceed. If you're following. Kelvin Bakari, are we good? Okay, Kelvin, are we good? Okay, I guess it's this network. All right. So the builder services dot add controllers, right? So this tells the app that I actually have controllers, but I want to use it in my application. So controllers, one might want to ask, what are controllers? Controllers are C# classes, like there are C# classes that handle incoming requests when someone visits your, like for example, now someone comes to your application and wants to register in order to use your application. Once they submit their first name, last name, and password, and they click the button to submit, that process of clicking the button is actually sending a request to the server, right? It's actually sending a request to the server. A class that is responsible for creating that endpoint or that URL is actually the controller, okay? So the controller houses or contains those URLs, those endpoints that the front end or the person that's going to call your endpoint that's going to use it, right? So controller contains such endpoints, all right? Then the add endpoints API Explorer. So this scans your controllers and collects information about all your API routes. So it's more like it feeds information to Swagger so that it knows what endpoint exists. Because whenever you run your Swagger and you click on a particular endpoint, this is able to detect the particular endpoint that was clicked so that it has a way of redirecting that particular endpoint to the specific um, endpoint that was created in your controller. So this helps to do that. And add Swagger gen is more like, because we want to use Swagger in testing, we also need to add the service the moment we run the application. Okay. All right. Kelvin, are you following? Seems you had issues with network.
Yes, I just tried to change my network.
Okay, okay. All right. So that's it. All right. Then the app builder dot build is more of saying now we are done with adding all the services. We need to build, right? We are done with adding all the services. We need to build the app. So you can think of this like um, you press a compile on a blueprint and we get the actual object. The beauty of the builder.build is that once all the services, right? Once all the services are added and you build, you cannot just come here. You can't do something like this. You can't just come here and say you want to add another service. It's not going to actually see this. So take note of that. Whatever services you add should be before when you want to build the app. You don't add it after building the app. You add all the services you want to use before you build the app. So take note of that. That's one mistake people make. All right. Then the app.environment is development. So this is more like saying I want Swagger to test this. So this is saying if this is in development has to do with when you are actually in the testing phase. Because we are actually in the testing phase, we want to use Swagger. We want to run Swagger. We want to use Swagger to test the APIs. But whenever we deploy this application, whenever we deploy it, it is now going to be the environment because we have deployed the endpoint. It's now going to be in production, right? It's going to be in production because we are testing. This is actually going to execute because we are currently in development phase and we're actually testing. And because we are testing, we want to use Swagger and Swagger UI to test our APIs. But if it is in production, this will not run. This will not run. So that's the meaning of the statement. That's the meaning of the statement. Then use HTTPS redirection is more like saying if someone tries to access the app using a plain HTTP, right? If someone tries to, there are two kind of HTTP. You have the HTTP and the HTTPS, right? HTTP and HTTPS. So whenever you use HTTP, HTTP is kind of not secured for those who have seen of are sensitive enough to see that such difference. HTTP is not secured compared to HTTPS that is more secured. So if someone tries to access the app using the HTTP, this will automatically redirect them to HTTPS URL or route. It's going to redirect them to an HTTPS route. So that's what this does. Okay. All right. Then use authorization. Use authorization is more like checking the person that is sending the request. Is that person authorized to actually send that request? It checks if the person has the permission to send such a request to the server. If the person does not have the permission to do that, it's going to send a response back to the person that's sending the request saying you do not have permission to send such requests. So these are um, lines of code that are put in place just to make sure that whenever you run your program, it checks that certain things are in order. Okay. If I remove this line of code, it means if I run my program, there is no place that is going to check the request. There's no place that is going to check if the person sending that request is authorized or have the permission to do that. But if my intention is actually to check to make sure that people have permissions to do certain things or send requests, I have to add this line of code. So it checks that someone sending that request is actually have the permission to do that. Then map controllers is more of the URL coming in or the endpoint that is hit will be directed to a particular endpoint in the controller and all. All right. So that's just a summary, right? That's just a summary of what these guys are. Maybe after class, you can just go in depth to see more explanation about them. Any question? Are we good?
Um, I have a question.
Your voice is not audible.
What about now? Can you hear me?
Yes, 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 it is.
Okay. Okay, so the question is the part where you said if you want to build an application
Mm,
and the services that you need to, add them at the beginning of you
before
writing your code
this,
before. Oh, before. Oh,
yes,
okay, okay. I think I get it now. Oh, oh, I
you
get it
get it
now.
now,
Thank you.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. Because if your intention is to use Swagger Gen and you add it here, sorry, you add it um, here. Once you run your application, you will not see Swagger Gen because the builder didn't see this swagger. This is just you putting it there. You need to build. It's just like you writing a code, and after you writing the code, you need to build to make sure that code is actually working. That if you have added the service and you build and you come here to add another service, there's no way for this to see what this is. Do you get? Because it's more like working and it's working runtime, right? Okay.
I get.
All right. So what we'll do now, um, let me write the structure or the flow of how we are going to go about today's class so that we have the goal. So first off, I'm going to create, let's say, I'm going to create the class. I'm going to create the class that will, okay, I'll create one class because of time. I'm going to create one class, right? I'm going to create the class that will be stored in the database. So I'm going to create the class that is a table, right? So in our case, I would create the student class. I'm going to create the student class, and the student class is going to have properties like the ID, um, first name, last name, email. Okay. So ID, first name, last name, email, right? Then after creating the class, secondly is to install the packages that we will use. In our last class, I talked about when creating your ASP.NET Core. First, you have actually created the class. You need to install the packages you would use throughout your um operation, right? Throughout your operation. So you need to install the NuGet packages. Yeah, you need to install the NuGet packages. Then, thirdly, after installing it, we will create a DB context. We're going to create a DB context class. And if you remember, DB context is it's more like the gateway to your database, right? It's more like the gateway to your database. So it helps you write those SQL commands behind the scene, right? Without this DB context, you would be writing those SQL commands, going through all those stress. But the DB context helps to solve that challenge. Okay, so we'll have to create the DB class and do the necessary boiler template. After which, we'll go further to create the controller, right? Create the controllers. Create the controllers. So in our case, it's going to be the student controller. For every class you create, right? For every class you create, there is always a corresponding controller attached to that class in some scenarios. So an example is in a school management software, we can have the student entity, right? We can also have the, yeah, we can have the student entity. Why do we need to have the student entity? Because such application needs operations like ability to add a student to the school, update the student's information, delete a student from the school, or get a particular student or get all the students in that school. That is why it's an entity, and that is why there is a controller for it, because it's going to have endpoints or APIs, right? Then another entity that will have similar flow of CRUD operations is who can tell me, aside the students, what other entities would have the operations, CRUD operations that we would use? Anyone?
Employee record.
Sorry, I
I
didn't hear
said
you.
employee
Okay,
staff record or employee
okay.
record.
Yeah, staff record, adding the staff, yeah, then removing the staff. So for every staff record or entity, there would be a controller which you would name staff controller, student controller. You would see all the namings convention, how we do the namings, right? All right. Okay. So after creating the controllers, this is more like indirectly creating the endpoints. Yeah. It's like creating the endpoint. So after you have done all that, um, the fifth one will be to um, you create your DB class, then you run your migration. Yeah, run the migration. I think this run migration should be here. Yeah, it should be here. Exactly, it should be here. Create your DB context, add your DB set, then run migration and update your database. Then you create your controllers and finally you run to test your APIs. Run to test your APIs. I will try as much as possible to be very, very simple, like very simple. It's not going to be that complicated, okay? So pay attention. Okay, I hope I'm not missing anything. Are we good with this? Or is there any step I'm missing from my last class? Bakare, we are good with this step now, right?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay, all right. Great. Tolu Animi, welcome. Akinola, the long I saw you in class. Okay, so let's go ahead to create the class with ID, first name, last name, and email. Okay, so I would come here. Like I said, this is not how we do it in the real world, right? When you're working in real world projects, right? But for now, let's do it the simpler way. Then later on, I show you the best way to structuring your projects and your classes and all. Okay. All right. So I'll come here to create a class, a student's class. Uh, okay. And I give it student, right? Student. Wait. So this student will have the student is going to have properties like public int ID, the ID of a student, um public string first name, first name, mm, public string last name, then what else? Email, yeah, public string email. So these are the properties we have: ID, first name, last name, email. Okay. So we have created that. The next is to install the Nugget packages that we will use. So if you remember in our last class, I made mention of two packages we'll be using to interact with the database, and which are entity framework, server, and the one of the tools. So in order to install the packages, you come over to your solution explorer, you right click on dependencies. So dependencies is the place that keeps all your packages that you'll be using. So you can right click on dependencies and go to manage NuGet packages. Okay. All right. Then go to browse. Then you're going to search for entity framework. Once you search for entity framework, you see the available packages that comes with entity, Microsoft.entity framework core. So you just need to search and go to um, the one of the SQL server. So SQL server is like your database, the database you would be using. You know, we have Postgres SQL, we have SQLite, and all. Then what we'll be using in our class today would be SQL Server, which is a database that we'll be using to store our data. So we need to install the package that comes with Entity Framework Core. Okay, so I click it and install it. Now, pay attention to this. This is very important. I made a lot of mistakes here. Then, so if you check now, every package you try to install comes with their versions, right? It comes with their respective versions. So we see here we have 10.09 versions, we have version 8, version 7, version 6, version 5, and so on and so forth. Now I'll ask a question. Who can remember um when we created the SP.NET Core project, right? There was a part or there was a field that was asking us to select the particular framework, which is 8, 9, or 10 thereabout. So what framework did we use? Is it 8, 9, or 10? What framework did we use?
9.
Hmm. Are you sure it's 9? Is it
Yes.
Bakare, is it 9?
We use hate.
It was 8 we used now. Yeah, it was 8. We used 8 actually. Yeah. If you want to see that information, you can come here. Then yeah, this provides. So once you click on the project, you see the framework you choose, which is what? .NET 8.0, which is this, not 9. Right? So there's a reason I asked that, so as to avoid issues when trying to install some packages. So whenever you try to install Microsoft Entity Framework Core packages, these versions you see here for the package has a relationship with actually the framework you are using. So what I'm saying in essence is, if the framework I used here is .NET 8.0, I should not go ahead to install a version that does what? That is different from that 8.0. I should not come here and install version 10, because you won't be able to install it. It's going to cause conflict. Yeah. So whatever framework you start with, whenever you're installing a package, install the package that tallies with that framework you started with. Do we all understand? Thumbs up if you understood what I just said. All right, great. So that's just it. Because if I go ahead to install version 10, it's not going to work, because it's going to try an error saying this version you're trying to install, it does not correspond to the framework you are using. So because I'm using 8, I need to choose the particular version 8, right? Which is this. So I can choose any version in this 8. I can choose 8.0.28 or 27. So far as the framework, the version is 8, it will still work. So I always prefer choosing the latest version 8, which is the last one, which is 8.0.28. If I choose version 9, I won't be able to install the package successfully, because they are of different frameworks, right? They have different versions. So just take note of that. So because the framework I use to creating the project is 8, I it's expected I choose a package of version that corresponds to the framework, which is 8. So just take note of that. So I go ahead to choose version 8, then install. Hope we are following. All right. Then there is a package that comes with if you don't have that package or that Nugget package, you won't be able to run migrations, right? You won't be able to automatically update your database. So there is a package that is responsible for running your migrations and or which is the tools, entity framework or .tools. So we also need to install that as well. So I have not accepted this. Let me accept that and install that. If you have any question, please feel free to ask. All right. Then the tools is the next one. So if you check it now, the documentation, you can actually read up the documentation, the README files. This tells you what more about the package you are trying to install. You can see over here, you can see the commands that comes with this package. It's telling us if you run this, it means you want to add a new migration. So the documentation, you can actually read up more about it. So I'll just go ahead to install it. But first, I need to check the version. So I have to choose version 8. Take note of that. Okay, then go ahead to install it. All right, so I think it has been installed. To confirm it has been installed, what I usually do is that I go to my Solution Explorer, then come to my dependencies, then the packages that have been installed, and I would see that this has been installed, the SQL and the tool. So this tool has been installed for us. So we have successfully installed that. Any question before I go further? Or thumbs up if you understood to this point. Thumbs up if you understood to this point. Hello? Can someone hear me? I'm talking to myself.
Oh, can hear you, sir.
Okay. All right. All right. Thanks. Okay. So let's proceed to the next step. So the next step is creating the DB context class. We're going to create the DB context class. All right. So I'll go here to create it. I'll go to my Solution Explorer to create that. Okay, which is your class. I can call it school school context. Let me call it school context. Yep, school context. All right. So school context is going to be a custom database context class, right? It's going to be a custom. Let me write that in. This will be a custom database context class. So the school context will have to inherit from the parent class that contains all the EF core functionalities, right? It has to inherit from the parent class because on a norm, I can't just go ahead to use the reason for creating my own context is because I can actually adjust it. I can actually add to it, right? But if I go ahead to use the predefined or the inbuilt class that comes when you install or use ASP.NET, I can't actually edit it, right? I can't actually add to that class because I don't have permission to do that. So for me to solve that challenge, I have to create my own custom context class and inherit some of the features from the main DB context class so that I would also have those features from the parent class and also have my own custom defined features. Hope we are following, right? Thumbs up. I'm trying to take my time in this because it's more like the foundation. So you would notice I'll be very, very slow in this aspect. Okay. All right. So public class school context, which is going to inherit from the DB context, going to inherit from DB context. All right. Then I'll create my constructor. I'm going to have my constructor setor. So constructor. So inside my constructor, right? Inside my constructor, it needs to get. Let me go into this DB context so that you would see what I'm trying to do. So we I can. Okay. So this is the parents class, right? This is the parents class, the DB context class that has the this is the constructor I want to inherit from. I want to get this DB context option, right? The DB context option. So these options, right, is more of like saying whenever you go to your program.cs and try to connect it to your DB context, this should read from your custom DB context class, right? So I need to add this constructor in my custom DB context, okay? So how to do that is to call the DB context option. Yeah, DB context options, then passing my school. I know I've not talked about generics. Yeah, I've not talked about generic. Generics is more of some intermediate, it's more like intermediate concept, right? There are intermediate things to talk about. So for now, just I'm going to explain this now. I was supposed to talk about generics, but generics, beginners struggle to understand what generics are. That's why I always shift it to the intermediate level. The one beauty thing with the DB context, right? With this DB context is that it's like a boiler template. Once you have set it up, you can use it for all your projects. You can use it for all your project, okay? So this is more like a generic, okay? It's more like a generic DB context of school context. Then you pass your options, and this is going to inherit from the base, the options, the base, and all. I think that is just it. So this is the constructor that runs whenever you run your program. So whenever you run your program, it is actually going to create your school context. It's going to create your school context for you. So it's more like it receives the options which contains the database configuration. What we are doing here is actually setting up those options that contains those database configuration, like more like saying which database to connect to and what connection string to use. So every database you try to connect to has an address, right? Every database you try to connect to has an address. There should be an address you try to connect to. And for you to connect to such address, you need to have those database configuration, which is included in the DB context options, right? Don't bother yourself about this generic now, right? Just know how to write it. Then later on, I'll explain what generics are, right? What generics are, so you don't get confused. But just understand what this is actually doing. This is more like setting up the database configurations, all right? Okay. I think then finally, after setting them up, the next thing is if you remember in our last class, I talked about DB sets, right? DB sets are like um are those terms, or DB sets helps you create the table in your database. It helps you create the table in your database. So if you have a student class and you also want to add that student table to your database, you need to add that student in your DB set. You need to include it in your DB set so that whenever you run migration, DB set will automatically create a table for that student and also update it in your database. So that's the usefulness of DB set. So I need to create a DB set for my students class. And the reason for doing that is because I want to have a student table in my database. So if I have another class called staff, if I have a staff class, because I want to have a staff table in my database, I would need to create a DB set of staff. And by me creating a DB set of staff, whenever I run migration, it will add that staff class as a table to my database. Hope you are following. Thumbs up, or if you have any question, you can ask. Or if we are good, thumbs up if we are good. Can someone hear me? Okay. Bakare, Oshikoya, Samuel, Kelvin, are we good? All right, great. So that's it with this. So for now, we want to add the student table to our DB, to our database. And because we want to do that, I have to create the DB set for that. And how do we create that? Is the same way we do creating our properties. So I call my public, then DB set, then passing DB set of what is actually a DB set of student, DB set of student. Then I call my student table, and then my getter and setter, right? Okay, should be get set, right? Get and setter. So if you do this now, whenever you do this and you run migration, the name of the table you would see in your database is going to be student. It's going to be a student table, right? It's going to be a student table. So that's how you're going to see it in your database whenever you update your database after running your migration, right? Okay, Kinola, go ahead.
So good evening. So I just want to um ask a question regarding this DB set we're creating the database. So
Okay.
um we are using students. I don't know. I was able to, how would I put it now? To get, I had, okay, let me just put it like this. I had that
Mm-hmm.
for different database type, there is a specific way you name your student table property. So I don't know if that is what you are doing or this is generalized for every type of database. Because now for SQL database, students like the is it the
The
plural we'll
name.
call it now
Yeah,
as you
plural.
did it.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So they say it works. So now if somebody wants to use Postgres and any all those other type of database, how, because if you don't know now by if you don't know that okay, the naming convention, let me just
Mm.
put it of a particular type of database, and you use the one you are used to, how will you be able to is it identify or debug that there's a problem? Because I've once encountered such challenge. That's why I'm asking this question.
Okay. All right. Although I didn't really get what you are trying to say, but let me um come again to this part. So most times when you create a table, right? When you are trying to create a table, the name of that table matters a lot. And because that table is going to contain a collection, it's not going to contain one information, it's going to contain multiple information. That is why we always pluralize or add S to the entity because it's going to contain collection of data, right? So if you go ahead to choose singular, it works, right? It works, but it's not going to make sense because you can't use a singular name that stores collections of information, right? Because if you go ahead to use singular now, and maybe in future you are trying to query that table and you end up using S, there will be an error because whatever you name your table with is what you use all throughout the lifetime of that application. So if you use student, it means it's student you are going to use all throughout the application. So I don't know if that answers your question or you want to rephrase. Akinola.
Yeah, yes, yes. Thank you.
Okay, you are clear, right? You are good?
Mm, to an extent, sure, but that's why I've been able to get something, sure.
Okay. To an extent. All right. Okay, fine. So if I have another entity called staff, let's say assume I had staff entity, I can just come here, also include um the staff as well. I can come here and include that here, staff. Then this is going to be a DB set of staff. So whatever entity that I create and I want to also add such entities to the database, I have to include such entity to my DB set so that whenever I run migration and update my database, it's going to be added as a table to my database. Okay. All right. So we are done with our custom um, DB context. So let's go over to the program.cs. So the next one is running migration and updating your database. So for us to do this, we need to create our DB, our SQL database. So we need to actually do this. We need to do this. So this should be step 4, create your SQL DB. Then 5 will be okay, let's see. All right. 5 should be register your DB, your connection, your DB connection in your program. You need to register it .cs. You need to register it in your program.cs. For 5, 6, 7, 8. Sorry, 1 minute. I mean on my charger. Okay. All right. So now we are going to create the SQL database. For us to do that, first off, the beauty about Visual Studio, whenever you install your Visual Studio, it comes with a database, the SQL database, which you can use for our testing. Okay. So in order to locate that, you come to your view, then locate SQL Server Object Explorer. Yeah. All right. So this is it. This is your SQL server. So you come here, click down, takes you to your database. So from here, you can actually create the database you would use. So add new database and you give it a name, which can be my student DB. So this is the name of my database. When you create it. All right. So it has been created. Now I need to get the address so that I can connect it. I need to get the address of this um, database. So what I would do is to right click on it, then check the properties. Right click and check the properties. Okay, let's see. Okay, all right. So if you come here, you need to check for the part that says connection string, connection inform string, which is this. Can we see this? Thumbs up if you can see this. Can you see my connection string name? All right, great. So this is what I'm interested in, the data source. This is what I'm interested in. So I would copy this and save it somewhere. I'm going to copy it and save it somewhere because I'll be using it somewhere. All right. Then I'll go over to my program.cs to add and register the DB. I would definitely make use of my DB context service. Remember the first when I began by explaining what these add controllers, add services, the essence of adding some services, because you definitely used it in your application. So if you check now, I've not actually added my DB context service. So I need to add that because obviously we'll be dealing with database. So I actually need that service in my application. So I have to go ahead to add it. Okay. All right. So it's going to be builder.services.add. Add what? DB context, right? So this DB context is a generic. It's going to be a DB context of your custom DB context, which is your what? Your school context, right? It's actually your school context. Then you need to pass in the options, your database. You remember I explained that database options. So that database option contains your database configuration, what you'll be passing in as your database configuration. So whenever you run this code or you run your program, this line of code is actually going to go in here to your um is actually going to go to your custom DB context to assign the values to it. It's going to actually come here to set that your database configuration for you. So that's why we needed the DB context options so that when we register the service and add the configuration, it will automatically get the configuration and connect to the DB. That's what we want to do here. Okay. So we'll pass in we'll create the options. I've not talked about Lambda yet, but just pay attention. Okay. Then options, going to be options dot, I'll explain it, don't worry. SQL server, SQL server, then pass my what? The address. I need to pass in the address of this SQL server. So what I just did here, right? So the essence of this is to connect your app to the database, actually to connect your app to your database. So the school context we are using is your gateway to the database. It is actually the class that lets you read and write data using C# instead of writing the raw SQL, right? Then this part of use SQL server tells it to use the Microsoft SQL server as the database engine, right? It's more like saying use the SQL server database as the database engine, okay? In here will be the database URL or the database connection string, which I need to include here. I need to add that here. So the stuff I copied, I'll have to paste it here. I'm going to paste that here, which is this. I can actually paste it here. But if you do not want to do this, if you don't want to actually do this, you can, because looking at this now, it's a bit untidy. You can actually go ahead to create a variable, right? You can go ahead to create a variable to can go ahead to create a variable to um hold that. Then inside here you just pass it. So either way works. Connection string R-I-N-G.
Is that your connection? Is it correct? I think
Eh?
connects. Your
Okay.
connection.
Sorry. Yeah, thanks. Mm, Connc. Yeah, thanks. So this is it. You can actually do that or do it this way. Create the variable, then pass in there. Then I remember I've not talked about var, right? I've not talked about var. Yep. I've not talked about var. Or who has come across var? Maybe in your research or something. You can just tell us what it does. Who has come across var? Anyone? Okay. Akinola. Yeah, go ahead now. What does it do?
It's just like declaring data types. So when you use a var, it and you pass a value to it, it automatically identifies what kind of data type you are storing. So I've forgotten the name it's being called, but that's the explanation I can give to it.
All right. It infers the data type at runtime, right? It does that at runtime. And one way to do that is when you hover on the so for example, the way we are used to creating variables is string, string name equal to Gideon, right? String name equal to Gideon. So I can actually do this var name2 equal to Gideon, which still works, right? Which still works because if I hover on this, it's now telling me that that is actually a string. So it has a way of getting um the data type of the value and assigning it to this. So one advantage of the var is there are times we can have a very long data type. Maybe we can have a very long data type. This is even very short. String name is very short. So there are times we would have data types that is as long as this. Maybe we would have this kind of data type called maybe database um, configuration settings that is going to be our generic uh, int, then value equal to that. So I don't want to always be writing this. I can actually use var to take care of that, and it's going to dynamically get the data type for that value. So there are other reasons why people use var. So I prefer using var when the name is along and all. Okay. All right. So now that we have registered the um, database, the DB context to our application, the next thing is to um, run migration, right? But before we run the migration, let's check our DB if there is anything there. Let's check. Actually, we go to the tables to see. So if you check the tables, there's actually nothing. There are no data aside these predefined folders that came, right? There's actually nothing there. So there's no data here. There's no data like migration history or students information. There's nothing here. It's empty and new. Okay. So we'll go ahead to run the migration. We're going to go ahead to run migration. I think that is our next step. Okay, register, run migration. All right. So we need a command line interface for running the EF core migration commands. So in order to get that interface, we go over to the view, then we look for the package manager console. Under the view tab, go to other windows and search for the package manager console, which is this. So this is going to provide us with the command line interface for running our migration commands. And oh, so we select this and it's going to pop up this for us. So in here, we'll be running the commands we need to run, right? So when adding our initial migration, there is a command to add migration. If you check the documentation, let's go to the Nugget package where I was having the information of how to run migrations. Think tools, yeah, tools. All right, so this is it. So this is it now. If you want to add the migration, you run this command. So that's what we want to do. We want to run add migration, okay? Great. So we are going to add migration. Then the name of the migration we are running or adding, we give it the initial migration. We give it the initial migration. And after doing that, you click your enter. Make sure things is working fine. So it's building. It has to build your code to check, make sure there are no errors. Then it's going to run your migrations for you. And it has done that. So after running the migration, it automatically creates a history just to keep track of what has been done, what has been added, what has been removed, and all. So this is just basically the file it has created for us, which is the initial migration file that contains what will be added to your database. So in a nutshell, right, without EF core, we will be writing all these commands. We are actually going to be writing this manually. This is basically the command. This is what we'll write in order to create a table in our database. We'll be writing all this. But run migration helps to do that for us. So whenever you run migration, automatically it writes all this for us. It does that for us, saving us the stress of manually writing this line by line. So it has actually added the student table with its properties, which you can see here, the ID, the first name, the last name, the email, and all. Then putting a constraint of, it has a way of saying, because we are actually using the ID, it has a way of saying that ID we use as a property is actually a unique key. It's actually a primary key. Primary keys are actually unique properties that cannot be, the values of those properties cannot be duplicated or cannot be shared across other objects, okay? So it's unique for that particular entity or that particular object. So it has a way of identifying the primary key, which is the ID. So it does that for you. So also in the last class, I made mention of maybe you made a mistake by running the migration and you want to backdate or you want to um, delete, or you want to go back to the previous version. You want to go back to the previous version. So for you to go back to the previous version, there is a command you need to run that will delete this current migration that you have run, and it's going to take you to the previous version. And the command is remove migration So whenever you run remove migration, it's going to delete this current migration for you. So take note of that. Now we have run the migration. So it's expected if I go to my DB and refresh, if I come here and refresh and check my student DB, check the table, I should see the data. But I'm not seeing anything. Why? Who can tell me? Anyone?
It's because we've not updated the database.
All right, so I need to update the database. Yeah, thank you. I need to update the database. So I'll come here and update database. Great, I have updated it. So if I go to by DB and refresh this, always refresh if you want to see the data. So trace my database, my student database and the tables. You see I have this here. I have both the migration history, it is storing the migration history and also my student table. So if you check my migration history, you right click, you can actually view the data to see what has been stored. So that migration I ran, it has actually stored that history here as what the initial migration that stored that. All these values you see here, it's more like a format, right? It's a format that takes in the date, the year, the month, the date, and the time that was used to execute that migration. So if I should run another migration again, it's not going to have the same name with this one. It's going to take still the same day, but the time will be different and the seconds, right? Okay. Then here contains my student table. So basically there's nothing here. So I don't have data here. That's why it's empty. So no data, no student, just the property, ID, first name, last name, and email. So that's how we create database and that's how we connect to the database by running your migrations and all. So the final stage will be how do you seed information? How are you going to add an entity or add data to your database or to your student table? How are you going to do that? And one way to do that is for you to create an API that will be a request for people to be sending to that API. So you need to create an API that will be able to add data to the database. And that API is the controller we want to create now. Okay. All right. Any question before I go ahead? Or thumbs up if you understand this. Thumbs up if we are good with this before we go further. Hello. All right, great. So next is to create the controller. Let's see if we are on track. Migrations, it's not in here. Okay. Run migration. So we are going to create the controllers, which is going to be in this case student controller. We're going to create that now. That will have all our endpoints. Okay. All right. So for all your controllers or all your APIs, there is a folder that is designed for adding all your APIs and all, and that is your controller folder. So it's not cool doing that outside it. You have to do everything inside of your controller folder. So you come here, you right click and add the controller. You choose the controller file here. So it comes with different options. So for the controller, you can decide to start empty. Maybe you don't want to, maybe when you create it, you shouldn't come with some functions or some templates for you to use, right? You want to start empty, write your own plane from crash. You can go for this. Or if you want it with some read-write actions, you can go for this. Or with views, you can go for this. But in our own case, I always start mine empty and I give it a name. So when creating a controller class, if the entity was student, when creating that controller for that student, it has to be what? Student controller. Student controller. It has to be student controller. So if I had another entity called staff and I want to create a controller for it, it's going to be what? Staff controller. So all these are convention. If you don't do it this way and you run, because the reason for doing it is this way is because so that whenever you run your program, you run your application, C# will easily locate all your files that are actually containing your APIs. And one way to do that is it actually comes in and check the last word that was added at the end. If that is a controller, then oh fine. C# will know that inside that file there are APIs or there are endpoints inside there. So that's why all your controller class ends with controller, right? Okay, so student controller and we add it. So this is what we have now. This is what we have. We have the student controller, the controller, and all. So there are some things, there are attributes we need to put in place to tell C# that, oh, this is actually a real controller. It's actually a real controller. And one of the thing is the API controller. We have the API controller, which is always at the top of the class, the API controller. So the API controller tells ASP.NET that this class will be responsible for handling API requests. It's going to be responsible for handling API requests. Okay. Come here and API controller. You can always check the documentation here. Always read up the documentation here. So API controller. If I don't do this and I run my application, even if I have over 10 endpoints here, it's not going to be able to see those endpoints or even execute them because I have not added these attributes here. I've not added this here. I need to add that so that ASP.NET would know that actually that this controller is going to be responsible for handling API requests. Okay. Then secondly, the route, right? The route attributes is more like setting the base URL for all the actions that you would use in your controller. It's actually setting the base URL for the actions you would need in the controller. So for example, if I want to add a student, if I want to add students to the DB, I need the URL, I need the API for me to actually send that request to the um, server in order to add that student to the database. So I need to include that route here. If I don't include that route here, there will be no address tied to this student API. So I need to add that route, okay? Route, then you give it a name. So the name could be API slash API slash controller. All right, so API slash controller. So this is saying if my intention is to add student or maybe make use of any endpoints in this student API, first I have to call API slash. This is not actually API slash controller. This is like a placeholder that would automatically or dynamically get the name of this student. It's going to actually get the name of this student API. So in the front end or in your Swagger, whenever you run your Swagger, this is what you will see when you run your Swagger, right? Whenever you run your Swagger, this is what you will see. API slash student. This is what you will see whenever you run your Swagger. So this goes to your controller. It goes to your controller name and tries to get all the names, all the name that is before this controller. So I didn't if the name was, if the names, all the words here was student is good, it's actually going to get that student is good and append it to this controller. So here is going to be student is good. Hope we are following. Thumbs up if you understood to this point. Hello. I hope I'm not talking to myself. Class is quiet. There are no questions. All right. Okay. Thanks. Great. So that's it with the student API. So we need that route to tell ASP.NET Core that any request that is coming in, for you to gain access to all the endpoints yet, you need to call this. If you don't call this, sorry, you can't gain access to the endpoints that will be generated here. Okay. All right. Because the request that will be coming in, right? The request that will be coming in, we will need to create our controller. We need to create the controller that will um, hold such requests when this is created instantaneously, right? So what I mean is whenever you run your whenever you run your application, what happens is that it goes to all your controllers and tries to create the instance of everything. So for this one, it's going to create the instance of this student controller. So we need to have um, a constructor. We need to have the constructor that will have a link to your DB context. That's going to have a link to your DB context. Without that link to your DB context, you won't be able to perform operations like um, add, update, remove, get, find, and all, right? Because we need to have such operations, we need to create that link to your database context because it's actually your database context that has those operations like to find a particular entity or to delete a particular entity. So we need to create that link. And for us to create that link, we have to add that DB context to the student controller constructor. Okay, and that's what we want to do. So we will create a public, okay, seater, yeah, controller, then passing the custom context, then give it a name, context. Then we also need to create a field, a private field. I think I talked about private field. Whenever you want to create a private field that cannot be edited or cannot be modified outside of the class, we use underscore for it. We use underscore for it. And there is a keyword called read only. So read only is more like saying this property would only be gotten, or it's only going to be read, but it cannot be modified outside. Okay, it cannot be modified outside, right? So we need to create the read-only DB context, the context, school context, DB context. Private um, private read-only school context, then give it this context, then pass it in here. So our context is always going to be equal to the context here. So with this now, let me split my program into two so that I explain this part well. All right. Can we see my two screen? The two screen here. Can we see that? Um, can you guys see my two screen? Thumbs up if you can see my two screen. All right, great. Thanks. So whenever you run your code, it registers all your controllers, right? That's the essence of this add controllers. So it goes to all your controllers that you have created and registers it. Then it then goes to your DB context and also registers that. Then whenever there is a request, to your server, what happens is that it goes to that controller, right? Then what is also coming to that controller is actually the context, the database configuration that contains all those DB context, EF core operations like the ability to read, update, delete, and all. So that's why we needed to create a link between your student controller and the DB context so that you can be able to make use of the context to add, to remove, to update, and delete, and all, right? When we go further, you would understand this better. Okay. All right. Now that we have created the controller, next is to create the necessary endpoints, right? We need to create the necessary endpoint. Yeah, we need to create the necessary endpoint. So what we'll be doing first is that we are going to create fetch all students endpoint, right? Then we'll also define or create the um okay, create student endpoint, then update student endpoint, then maybe fetch by student endpoint, then delete students. Yeah. So we'll do it in this order. We're going to do it in this order. First off is the fetch. If I want to fetch all the students in my database, how am I going to do that? How am I going to do that? Like I said, for every method you define or create, you need to tell ASP.NET Core what kind of method you are trying to create. Is that method a get, a getter? Is that method is a HTTP post, or is it HTTP put or HTTP delete and all, right? So because we want to fetch student from the DB, what kind of HTTP method are we going to use? Anyone?
HTTP get.
All right, HTTP get, right? So we're going to use HTTP get. Okay, then HTTP get. We're going to use this. So, all right, we're going to use this. Then we create a method which is our endpoint. Okay, we're going to do that now. Um, public. Oh, that's very true. I was supposed to talk about asynchronous. Yeah, synchronous and asynchronous. Okay. Maybe what I would do is I'll talk about that in our next class. I'll talk about asynchronous and synchronous process. So, in a nutshell, right, there are times what we have been doing so far, right? What we have been doing so far, whenever we don't interact with the database, right, we perform what we call synchronous process, whereby every line of code that is being written doesn't wait. It just executes instantly, right? So if the line of code that we wrote is going to take 5 minutes to execute before going to the next line, it's actually going to wait for that line of code to execute for the 5 minutes before it goes to the next line, right? What I mean is this. I didn't talk about asynchronous and synchronous. Right. So synchronous is this. Let me just explain what this is. Synchronous operations or operations is more like if I have 5 lines of code, right? If I have 5 lines of code, let's say four, right? Let's say this is line one. Okay. Line two, line three, line four, line five. All right. So I have line one, line two, line three, line four, line five. So I have these lines of code. So on a norm, whenever you run your program, right, what happens is that it's going to execute this, it's going to execute this. It comes to line three, execute, comes to line four, and it comes to line five, it executes. It's synchronously doing that. So what if it was in line two and there is an implementation that is going to take 10 minutes, right? There is an implementation that is going to take 10 minutes before it's going to process. It's going to take 10 minutes to process that information before going to line three. So what happens is that it passes line one, it goes to line two, it then have to wait. Line three will never execute until line t line two is done, until that 10 minute has been completed before it then goes to line three. So that's what we call synchronous operations or synchronous activities, whereby um, if the next action or if this a particular step is going to take 20 minutes, the next step is not going to execute until the current step has finished executing. Do you all understand that explanation before I go back to asynchronous? Thumbs up if you understood that illustration. Okay. Bakare, Oshikonya, Samuel, Kelvin, are we good? Okay. All right. But then imagine um you go to an application, maybe there's this application, you go to an application, and in that application you try to what example will I use now? You try to download a movie, right? You try to download Netflix movie. So you go to where the movie is and you click on download. With Synchronous now, you would have to wait. You can't actually navigate you around yourself. You can't navigate to other pages in the Netflix. You have to wait until that download has been completed before you now continue with whatever you want to do, which is always not user friendly, right? You want this scenario whereby you want some applications that actually when you do something, you can actually leave that and go and do something else. Why what you performed previously is actually running at the background. So you want to really have that feel. You want to see things like that. And that is where asynchronous programming comes in. So with asynchronous programming, how asynchronous works is that if there is an implementation that will take 10 minutes, right? Whenever this line 2 executes, it's not going to wait for line 2 to finish. It's going to immediately go to line 3, right? It's going to go to line 3 immediately. Why at the background, line 2 will be performing its operation and all until when it's done, then it's going to complete. So it's more like there would be no blockage, there would be no stopping, right? Do we get that? Thumbs up if you understood that as well. All right. So that's it. So we use more of asynchronous programming. We use more of async methods or endpoints when dealing with database. Who can tell me why? Who can tell me why? There are a lot of reasons, why we must use async methods or async operations. Okay, Akinola.
One of the reason is because of the large number of data you might be pulling from the database to the user, from server to the user. So um, you would want to use an asynchronous an async when implementing that kind of um let's call it implementation. So that's one that I know. And also, just like you mentioned, if there's if you need to do something, okay, for the student management system you are building now, maybe you need to as a teacher, uh maybe you probably signed up and you want to get the student data or of your class that you're handling. And while you are doing that, it's loading. Then you remember you needed to do something, maybe update curriculum or update subject as well. So uh, you can that one can be working while you do the other thing you need to do actually that you want to do. So that's the explanation I can give to that.
All right, yeah, thank you. So most applications like Jumia, can you see my screen? So Jumia now, you visit Jumia website. You see all this data that is being displayed here. You see all this data here. They are being fetched from the backend. They are from the database. All this data are being fetched from the database. All this and all. So imagine coming to this website and you can't do any this thing. You can't actually, because it's actually loading lots of information from the DB. There are some websites whereby when you visit, you see a loader that it will take over 3, 4, 5 minutes to load before you can do anything, which is very, very bad. It is not ideal, okay? So that's where asynchronous coming out. With asynchronous now, you want to a website, it's actually loading, but you can actually go to other pages and still come back to see that the data has completely been fetched. Okay. All right. So we want to fetch all students from the DB. So um public, then for database calls, for database operations, it's always good to um put an async, right? We need to put an async, make that method asynchronous. And for you to do that, you use the keyword async, right? Then there's what we call tags, right? Tags is a keyword in C sharp. So tags is useful when you want to perform some database calls or some database manipulation, which is that. So you make use of the tags, okay? Then passing your um I action results, more like your action results, saying because I want to have a tax of action result, it means I want to make use of some response that you would see in your front end, like you would see in your response, like those 202 status code. I think I gave you guys an assignment to check up different status code. Hope you guys check them up because you would use that a lot in our next class next week. So action result has a way to um interact with your swagger and oh, so action result, then inside here I can decide to do this. It's so tax of because I want to get the list of students from the database, I can say return the tax of list of students, right? List of students. I want to return this, then get student from the DB, get student from the DB. Then I will return what? So for every asynchronous um method, for every asynchronous method, there is always going to be an await, right? There's always going to be an await for every asynchronous method. There's always going to be an await. So an await is more like saying, um, don't wait for this operation to finish before you do the next act. Just continue do it, continue running it at the back end. So that asynchronous process comes with the await keyword. It works hand in hand. You can't just have async without having await. So for every async synchronous method, there must be a corresponding await keyword that would put a wait on that operation, preventing blockage in your UIs and all. So return await. Then now I want to find all the students, right? I want to display all the students that is in the database. Remember, I made mention of your DB context, right? Your school context. Your school context has access to those operations like find, like to list, like delete or dot remove and all, right? So for me to have access to that, I need to call in the field name that is linked to my school context, which is what this context, okay? So context dot what? Where am I getting the information from? I need to tell ASP.NET Core I'm actually getting the information from the student table. And what information do I want to get? I want to get the list of all the students in that DB. And getting them, I have to convert that to a list so that you will be able to see it in your UI. Okay. So this and the list async. Oh, I think we're having an error here. Does not contain definition of to list and no accessible extension list accepting the first error will be found. Are you missing? So I would need to import this. I need to import this. So it's telling me that this to list async, it's part of a package, which is the EF core. So I needed to import this, which is part of the entity framework core. So I need to import that for me to um, use that. So whenever you want to get an information or get a list of data from the database, you have to call in your context, then call in the name of the context, the DB context, DB set table you are trying to get that data from, which is actually your student. So had it been I was dealing with staff controller and I want to get all the staff in that school, right? It's now going to be context dot staff dot to list async. Okay. Any question? Hello. Are we good? Okay, Kelvin, Samuel, Oshikoya, Bakare. Are you guys sleeping? Bakare, Oshikoya. I tell you guys are sleeping. No? All right. People are sleeping in my class. So that's it with creating endpoint for fetch. So what I will do now is, now that I've created it, I will run it. I'm going to run my code to see this endpoint in my Swagger. So I'm going to run it now. All right, great. So this is it now. This is the controller here, the student. Then in here, I have just one endpoint, which is what I created here. Which is what I created here, which is the get. Okay. So I come in here and you can actually try it out. So this is how you can test your endpoint. So execute will actually call, you clicking execute is more like a user in the front end trying to access a page that is fetching all the information. So whenever a user visits that page, automatically there is a request that will be sent to your API/student. So this Swagger is like your front end. You know, for some of us that do not have knowledge of front end, or you can't build a front end to test your API. You need something that you need to test your API with, and Swagger helps to do that. So Swagger provides that front end feel where you click a button and that button is actually testing your APIs. So now I want to fetch all students in my DB. So once I click this, what happens is that it's going to show this. It's going to return a response, which is a list of empty data. So this is a response of empty data. This is saying that there is actually no student in my database. There's actually no student in my database. That's what it means. There's no student in my database because if you check this now, if I refresh this, you realize that there's actually no students here. That is why it's returning an empty list, which is signifying no student is in the database. So what we'll do is we'll create the endpoint that would seed data into the um, database, okay? Going to create the endpoint that will seed data into the database. All right. Ding, 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 ding. So I'm going to close this. Wow, this is past 11. Sorry, oh, didn't know it was past time. Oh boy. Okay, let me just finish up with the create endpoint. Then we'll just call it a day, please. Sorry. Sorry. All right. So for create student, we make use of the post rather. We make use of the post. Then public async. Then it's now going to be tax of tax of student and tax of student. I want it to return this create student, then passing the object because this object here is what will be used. Don't worry, you guys will see it. Student, what will be used in your Swagger. Okay. So then whatever that is coming in, I have to call my context dot student to actually add this. So whenever you're performing add operation, you call your context that has all those functionalities and your DB set, which is the student, then the operation, which is to add. What are you actually adding? I'm actually adding this new student object, right? Then after doing that, I need to um return what? I need to return um an object that will contain the newly added student, which can be um maybe new student. Okay, new student. I can use this. No. It's let me see. Maybe I would have just used this one. Mm, All right, I'm going to return this student that has just been created. But watch what will happen. There's something that will happen, which someone will have to spot it out for me. So let me run this. Okay. All right. So we have the create student. We have the create student that has the ID, first name, last name, and email, which was what we passed in here as the full object that needs to be created, right? This is what we have here, right? So it's showing the ID, the first name, last name, and email. But there's something where there's something that is odd here, right? Which would lead us to talk about data transfer object, DTO, which is this ID. So whenever you create an object, especially when you're dealing with database, you don't need to pass in what? The ID as part of the field for the front end to fill, because that ID will be generated by the database. So it's always not nice to send this ID to your front end. The reason why it is showing here is because we're actually using the student object that is automatically getting all the property fields and displaying it here. But we do not need this ID. So that is where DTO comes in. You can actually read up DTO, why DTO is very necessary. Okay. So I'm going to remove that. Let me just remove that for now and make use of the first name, then last name is, then my email is this. So I'll click on save. So it's actually student field is required. E is an invalid start of the value. There's something wrong here. Let's see. Student field is required. Why do we have that? Why do we have that? Let me see something. Last name, you have it as 0. Come in. Oh, no wonder. I used int for last name. Yeah. Supposed to be string. Then email. Okay. All right. Now you watch. Oh, there's one weird thing with um changing your properties anyhow. So whenever you change or modify an error you did, you have to run migration. You have to add migration to add that update. If not, you have issues. So the change I did here, I also have to update the database and add that so that my database will keep track of the current change that has been done in my entity. Hope we got that. So I need to um, run migration for this. I need to run migration for this. All right, we'll soon be done. Modified last name field. So modified last name field. So which was this changing int. Okay. All right. So update database. So update the database. All right. It has been updated. So I will run my code again. Where is my... Sorry, guys. I'll soon be done. Okay. So So I'm going to create the student. So I'll pass in my first name, last name, email. So if I save this, I'm having this response. So this has been saved, right? First name, last name, email. These have been saved. But if I check my DB, I want to see someone who has been following. So if I check my DB and I refresh, I can't see that student in my DB. Who can tell me why? Who can tell me why?
Because you've not updated.
Sorry?
Because you've not updated it.
So how am I going to update that? I know I mentioned that in
On the command, on your command prompt.
command prompt where?
On the SQL server or
Oh, I did that. I actually did that. See now.
yes.
I
You ran
updated
the
my
command update.
database.
Yes, your database, yes.
Mm-hmm. But what I'm
You ran the
saying is,
command.
sorry,
I thought you ran a command to update it.
I've updated my stuff. I've updated it, right? So what I'm
Okay.
saying is this. I added this student, right? I added this student now. And let me use another name, safe. But I'm not saying that Steven. I'm not saying the Steven that I added. Let me add another Steven so that STEM Steven Okon, right? Then Okon at gmail.com. I'm supposed to see this student information in my DB, right? It was successful. Look at it now. I got a 200 response, which is success, right? Then I checked my DB, right? I checked my DB. I refreshed, and I'm not seeing that student. Why?
It's because you didn't save.
Sorry?
You did not save it.
Okay. So how am I going to do that? Where am I going to click to save?
Before you return, I think
Exactly. I
yes.
need to save it to the DB, right? I wait context dot save changes async. Yeah, I need to do this. I know I said this um in our last class, right? Whatever we do, whatever operation we perform, if we don't save these changes to the database, that object that was created will not be saved to the DB. Do we get that? Right. So if I um refresh this, if I rerun this now, and I um office, let me run it again. Okay. So all right, great. So this is it now. If I create this student again, maybe let me remove this to avoid confusion. Obim Chuku, Obim Chuku, Obinna at gmail.com. So if I save this, right, it saves to the DB. How do you know? Because initially we're having ID of 0. Now that it has saved to the DB database has assigned 1 to that new data. So if I add another one, if I add maybe OBIM2 and Obinna S and I save it, the database will now assign ID2 to the next new data. All this I explained on Monday. So if I check the DB now and I refresh, I'll see the two data here. So that's the beauty of working with database and all. So what we would do, what you guys would do, just try it. I think we might have class tomorrow. I'll try and fix a class tomorrow weekend if because I know this is tied to your assignment. You need to perform the update, delete and all. So just try it out. If you get confused, you can reach out to me on the Discord channel. Okay, so you're going to try the update, or on Monday I'll do the update, fetch and delete because of time. All right, any question? Sorry for taking this much of a time.
Because, hope you help us upload the video on time on YouTube, sir. This is
Okay,
what
okay,
we
okay,
want.
okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I will.
Thank you.
All right, now. So let me stop the recording. All right, so thanks, guys. Sorry for keeping you guys till this time. So we'll connect